Hello folks and welcome to our next video all about muscle actions. Now muscles can take on different roles to perform a movement. So those same movements we talked about before, our flexion, our extension, our abduction, our adduction, and our rotation, well guess what? Muscles can take on different roles. You're going to be having a muscle that's going to be the main muscle responsible for the overall movement. Then you're going to have a muscle that opposes that overall movement. So for example, if the main muscle is contracting, the antagonist is going to be relaxing. Then you're going to have synergies. And they're going to aid the prime movement. That means that there's going to be another muscle near or around that main muscle to make sure that bending for flexion is happening, for example. And then finally, we want to make sure we can actually stabilize that movement. And so there's going to be more muscles that's going to help stabilize that movement so we actually get the bending at the elbow or flexion that we're looking. Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get ourselves oriented to our visual here. I have all the different muscles that are involved at the bottom. So biceps brachii, yes, we saw before, it's coming back for us. Triceps brachii, the brachialis, and the rotator cuff. Now the rotator cuff is not just one muscle, it's a group of muscles. So I want that to be kept in mind, okay? Next, we also see the same movement. We are seeing a person who's facing forward and we're looking at their back and we're seeing our elbow bend back and forth, like almost as if you're saying hi to someone else, okay? And our goal is to understand how these different roles apply to bending the elbow. Okay, so you're bending the elbow. As you can see, we have a bend of the elbow going this way, bend going this way, bend going this way, and of course, a bend going this way. And our goal is to understand the different roles that muscles can, perform in order to help us bend the elbow. We always may think it's just one muscle doing a thing, but no, muscles usually work together in a lot of ways. And there's also muscles that are working against the overall movement as well to make sure we have smooth movement overall. So let's get into our first type of role, which is going to be the agonist or our prime mover. A prime mover means this is going to be the main muscle responsible for the movement. And the main muscle responsible for the movement of bending your elbow, as we see here, is going to be the biceps brachii. So we have our origin at the shoulder area, we have our insertion in the forearms, and remember, our insertion is going to get closer to our origin. And when that happens, you notice that we're going to be moving our forearm up and bending our forearm towards the actual origin itself to get closer to that shoulder area. How do we bend it? Through our elbow joint. Okay, folks? So the biceps are going to contract. Where they contract, they're going to flex at the elbow joint. That's where we get our main movements for, again, bending our elbow in this position. Now let's get into the antagonist. This is going to oppose the action of the prime mover. So what was the action of our prime mover, our biceps brachii? It was to flex the elbow joint, right, through contraction. That means that the antagonist muscle is going to oppose that. That means instead of flexing or contracting, it has to relax in order to allow this movement to happen. So our triceps brachii, we have an origin that's going to be, again, in your scapular shoulder area, and insertion is kind of wrapping around our elbow area here as well, towards our forearm. And our goal for this one is that, okay, well, if it's relaxing, is our origin and insertion getting closer to one another? No. We just are staying out where they are. But in order for this movement to happen, that bending of the actual elbow and the forearm getting closer to the actual shoulder, we need to make sure these triceps brachii are relaxed. We don't want our biceps brachii contracting and our triceps brachii contracting because, again, the movement won't be seamless, right? So every muscle has to play its role if we're talking about a particular movement. And again, we're looking at flexion of the elbow, okay? So this tricep brachii is going to be relaxing while the bicep brachii is, again, responsible for the main movement of flexion of the elbow, okay? So when we're thinking of our muscle actions, we're thinking of that movement of flexion of the elbow. In order to allow that forearm to get closer to the origin for a shoulder, for that bicep brachii, we need to have another muscle that's doing the opposite action, which is relaxing. That's where the triceps is going to come in. So you need both these muscles in order for that movement to happen. Now let's talk about what else, okay? So then we have synergy. Synergists are going to aid the prime movement. What does that mean? Well, if the prime mover's goal is to, again, flexion at the elbow, biceps brachii's goal is flexion at the elbow, we're going to need other muscles to help to make sure that particular movement continues, okay? And so we have the brachialis muscle. We have an origin here, which is on our humerus, And then we have an insertion here, which again is going to be on the forearm. Okay, of course, which is generally saying forearm. Now, as you can see, the brachialis is going to add to the amount of force for that contraction. And if you add force to a contraction, what are you doing? You're strengthening the contraction itself. Okay, so not only are we getting that extra force from the biceps brachii, now the brachialis is coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to help you do that actual flexion of the elbow as well, just to make sure this movement goes well. And then again, we have our antagonist, our triceps brachii, that's saying, as you all are contracting, I'm going to be the one that's relaxing to make sure we have that flexion at the elbow. And this really goes to show you how muscles work together to make movement happen. That's the whole purpose of this, right? But let's think about the brachialis. If it does the same exact thing as the prime mover, meaning it's responsible for movement, responsible what type of movement? Flexing at the elbow joint, then can it also be a prime mover and not just a synergist? The answer will be yes. It's very hard to distinguish a synergist and a prime mover. Sometimes the text will specifically say, hey, this is our prime mover, hey, this is our synergist, right? But most of the time, everything's working as a synergist and a prime mover together. So brachialis can be considered a prime mover as well, because again, it was causing flexion at the elbow. And of course, the biceps brachii can also be a prime mover because again, it is it's contracting to flex at the elbow. So the fact that the brachialis is going to add to that contraction by strengthening what biceps brachii does, they both can be synergistic to one another. Okay? Now let's go ahead and talk about the fixator. The fixator is all about holding the movement steady. We don't want us to be contracting and then relaxing with the antagonist, and then the synergist is also contracting, and then things just fall apart. We need to make sure we're stabilizing it. And what are we really stabilizing? We're really trying to stabilize our origin. But sometimes we may think that, oh, the origin doesn't move. Well, guess what? If all these pieces of muscles are moving, at some point, the origin point that we focus on might be the insertion point for other muscles. So we need to make sure we can stabilize movement in a lot of ways. And that's what the fixator is going to do. So to stabilize the origin of the prime movement. And how do we do that? Well, one example when it comes to, of course, bending your elbow is going to be the rotator cuff. So the origin is going to be here, the insertion is going to be here, okay? And so because of that, that means that first of all, rotator cuff means you're talking about at least 5 different muscles that are doing this to help with stability, okay? So keep that in mind. And then if we're looking at the origin here, which is on the scapula, and then we have our insertion, which is at the top of the humerus, for example, that means that that is going to be keeping the humerus in place as we are bending our elbow. That's the whole goal here of this rotator. And it can be considered, of course, a fixator as well. So the rotator cuff is going to brace the humerus. So brace for impact. Just think about that. That's what all those muscles of the rotator cuff are going to do. And remember, that means we're dealing with usually a group of muscles here. And fixators are most likely a type of synergist or subgroup of synergists because, again, yes, they're going to be aiding this overall flexion of the elbow no matter what. And so they can be considered a little group or subgroup of the actual synergist. But their goal is not to add to the amount of force. Their goal is to, again, stabilize that origin point to make sure that flexion can happen. So let's think about it overall. We have our ability to, you can just be looking for it right now, lift up your right hand, and of course, bend your forearm towards your shoulder. Okay, that means we're taking our insertion point of biceps brachii and getting it closer to our origin, which is our shoulder. That contraction of the biceps brachii is also going to be a contraction of the brachialis as well. So those muscles are near one another to add extra force, okay? And then underneath, where your upper arm is going to be your triceps brachii, and they need to be relaxed in order for that bending to happen. And then when you're looking at your shoulder and you see your scapula here in the back, that's going to be our stabilizing. That's going to help us stabilize our humerus to make sure that when we're making that flexion of the elbow, we don't actually start moving around in different areas. So all this comes together to make sure we have the correct muscle actions, to also make sure the muscle actions are smooth, right? If we have the agonist and antagonist both contracting, that would be an issue. Now let's go to the other side. What if we want to be like, okay, we're bending, now we're going to be straightening our arm back out, doing extension instead of flexion. Well, if you're talking about extension instead of flexion, now the triceps brachii are going to be the agonist, and the biceps brachii are going to be the antagonists. So when you extend, your triceps brachii are going to contract, and of course, your biceps brachii are going to relax. Okay, that means the synergists and the fixators are going to be related to, again, helping that biceps brachii relax, so there's not any additional force, and also just stabilizing everything so that movement can happen as well. I want to make it clear. We do that extension here. I can just feel my biceps brachii, and I'm like, hey, I still feel like it's kind of contracting a little bit. Guess what? When it comes to an antagonist, again, at this point, the biceps brachii, if we're talking about extension, would be the antagonist. They don't always relax 100% completely, okay? Sometimes they need to make sure they have a little bit of opposition, but they also need to make sure they're stabilizing the movement. So again, if I was to take my same arm, and again, I'm saying hi to someone, and I extend back out, my biceps brachii, my brachialis, doesn't have to 100% be relaxed, okay? Because again, the stabilization is going to matter as well. So just keep those details in mind. Let's go ahead and see what your book is showing you as well. It has different pieces of this table that's going to tell you a muscle that crosses on the anterior side of a joint produces flexion. So they have our pectoralis major muscle here. And as you can see, we're going to have our origins and insertion. They don't really focus on that. They're just saying, hey, if I'm trying to move this overall, move my arm up. Okay, so I'm starting to move my arm up. That's going to produce flexion. Doesn't that make sense? You're bending at some point. But what are you bending? You're bending not from the elbow, but you're bending up from where shoulder going, right? Then we have the muscle that cross the posterior side of a joint can produce extension. So that same movement, when we're definitely going to be bending our elbow up or bending our shoulder up on the anterior side, there's going to be an imposing extension that can happen when you basically take that same shoulder and extend your arms back. Completely different muscle, the latissimus dorsi, okay? And that means that the latissimus dorsi is the antagonist of the pectoralis muscle because flexion and extension go hand in hand, just like we saw with the biceps brachii and triceps brachii. So you can go through these different actions as well in your book, and I think they're very helpful. Let's go ahead and get into an example. Okay? For each action below, that means a muscle action, identify which of the two labeled muscles you would expect to be the agonist and which you would expect to be the antagonist. Another way of saying this is, which one's going to contract and which one's going to relax? Okay? That's one other way of just explaining it to yourself in your head. Then, state roughly where on the body would you expect to find a synergist for each of these movements. So before we even get into this, remember, we said that our agonist is going to be the primary mover. And it also is going to be the thing that helps us be able to do the movement itself, right? That's what our primary mover is, our agonist. And then we also said the antagonist is going to be opposing the agonist. So if the agonist is going to be contracting, the antagonist is going to be relaxing. Then we said synergists are going to aid the overall agonist. That means they're going to be adding force to that contraction, thereby strengthening it. So where would the synergist really be? Now, when I'm thinking of it, I'm like, well, the synergist has to be somewhere close to where our actual agonist is, because again, it's helping with that overall movement. Let's stabilize ourselves here. We have two different visuals. One has the deltoid and teres major. One is the zygomaticus major and mentalis. Okay, and they want us to figure out the synergist location. That means they're not saying right in the third, No, they're just asking where would it actually be? In the middle of the chest, top of the shoulder. You know what I mean? It's going to be above the mouth, etc., etc. Okay. Then they give us the different actions. Lifting your arm to the side. Lifting your arm to the side. If you're lifting your arm to the side, that means you are moving away from the midline. So you can also just say abduction. And smiling. What are you doing when you're smiling? Go ahead and smile right now. Right, I'm smiling. My teeth are showing. Yeah. My cheeks are moving towards closer to my eyes. That's the way I see it. My cheeks are moving closer to my eyes. They're kind of moving up in some kind of way. So that's what you want to think of when you're thinking of the actual action itself. Do the action if you can. Okay, lift your arm to the side and also smile. You start trying to feel around it. Okay. Now, when you're lifting your arm to the side, let's look at the muscles that we see here. We see the deltoid. We see the teres major muscle. Now, when you're lifting your arm to the side, what's going to happen? As you can see, that deltoid is moving, it's getting shorter here, and that teres major looks like it's relaxing here. So that automatically helps you feel like, okay, which one is going to be contracting, which one looks like it's just relaxing. Contracting means it's getting shorter. So I do see for my deltoid muscle here, I do see things getting shorter. For our teres major, I do see things, again, staying long or longer. Remember, the goal is abduction. So if I'm lifting my arm and I'm doing abduction, then I'm definitely talking about I'm just lifting my arm straight up, and we're talking about that deltoid, which is kind of like the shoulder muscle or capture muscle itself. So that's going to be our deltoid here. Again, our origin, insertion. So our origin is going to be, of course, near our actual scapular area, near the shoulder area or top of the shoulder area. And then we're also going to have our insertion that's going to be on our pinions. The teres major, on the other hand, this origin is going to be more medial. Remember, origin is going to be proximal or medial. And then the insertion is going to be kind of underneath that deltoid. Okay? But just by looking at it, understanding the action itself, I know I'm going to be contracting something if I lift my arm to the side. Okay? If I lift my arm to the side, I'm going to be contracting something. Of course, if my teres major is underneath the deltoid, I can see my deltoid is shorter. So I definitely am thinking, okay, this is going to be my agonist. And therefore, my antagonist is the teres major, because again, it does the opposite of the deltoid. It's relaxing. Now let's get into the details of the synergist. Where would the synergist be located? Well, first, focus on your agonist. Here's our deltoid here. And the synergist has to be somewhere around here, right? It has to be somewhere near that deltoid, because the goal is that it's going to be providing extra force to the overall contraction and thereby strengthening it, correct? So I do see another muscle here. And that's going to be the supraspinatus. And this is part of that rotator cuff. And we already said the rotator cuff is going to be a fixator, which is also a subgroup of a synergist. So where's the location of this? Looks like it's on the top of the shoulder as well. Okay? And for this origin to say, okay, it's close to the midline, the insertion will be here. So again, if this is getting closer to the origin, and this is getting closer to the origin, these are both, this supraspinatus is going to be supporting that deltoid movement of that insertion closer to the origin. So as soon as you move it up, or you move your arm up to the side, or of course you lift your arm to the side, for example, that deltoid is contracting, and that supraspinatus is also contracting, and it's going to be supporting that deltoid. So that is going to be our synergist. They're both going to be at the top shoulder area. Okay? And our teres major, again, is relaxing. Now, if you were trying to get closer to the midline of the body, meaning adduction, then that teres major would contract. And the deltoid would have to relax. And of course, the supraspinatus would have to relax as well. Okay, that part of that rotator cuff. But they're still not going to relax 100%. They're going to relax enough to not cause any instability. Okay? Let's go ahead and talk about smiling. So we have our zygomaticus major and our mentalis. Mentalis is going to be the muscle right here near the chin. Zygomaticus major, zygomaticus, that's telling you that you're usually probably going to be near the zygomatic bone, the zygomatic arch, okay? And this is basically like the zygomatic bone that's going to the lips. So we'll see that here. Or not the zygomatic bone, the zygomatic muscle that's here, going toward the lips here, okay? So that's going to be our origin here, and then our insertion is right here by the lips. And then mentalis, you'll see that here like in this little V shape. All right, and that just means mental region of the chin. Now, let's talk about when we're smiling. Go ahead and do it now. Smile. When you're smiling, what's happening to your cheeks? We already know our cheekbones are here where the zygomatic bone is. So if I'm smiling, my insertion, my lips are getting a little bit higher, my cheeks are getting higher to my eye area. So this insertion is getting smaller, right? It's getting closer to the origin, which is going to be our actual cheeks. And you can tell our cheeks are getting larger. You can pinch your cheeks and getting closer to your eye. So automatically, the zygomaticus major muscle is going to be our agonist. And of course, the antagonist automatically has to be the mentalis. Okay? Now let's think about this. When you are smiling, your mentalis muscle is kind of, yes, your chin feels like your chin's moving up. But if you even touch your chin and smile, you can see that you're not really causing any real changes to your chin. But when you frown and you touch your chin, you're trying to put your lips all the way down as much as possible and frown, I can definitely feel like my chin muscle is changing. So during frowning, your mentalis muscle is going to be the agonist, and your zygomaticus major is going to be the antagonist. But when you're smiling, the opposite. Now, since we're talking about the zygomaticus major, and we know that's going to be our agonist for this example, let's think about our synergist location. Where would our synergist location be? Well, we don't have all the little examples of tinier muscles here that we saw easy to focus on here. And this again was the supraspinatus. We didn't have all that, right? So when you're thinking of this, you only can go off of like a general location. So for me, I'm like, okay, I'm smiling. I know it has to do with the zygomaticus major. I know that zygomaticus major is going from my zygomatic bone to the lips. Okay, so the origin is at the zygomatic bone, and the lips is going to be my insertion. I'm moving it up. So there has to be something in between there, above where my lips are, that's going to help make sure that that movement is occurring, right? That's synergist. And so that I can just say is going to be above the lip. Above the lip is probably where I'm going to have some sort of synergist. Right, so just keep that in mind. Hopefully these examples are helping you go along, because again, the goal is to just make sure you can start putting this all together as well. I'll see you in the next video.